Hi, this is Nick Dawson from Talkhouse, and you're listening to the latest episode of Nobody's Ever Asked Me That. It's the spin-off series of the Talkhouse Podcast, where I talk to filmmakers, musicians, and writers, and ask them questions they've never heard before in an interview, in an effort to discover a different side of them and understand them better. When I first had the idea to start setting up these conversations, I made a list of 4 or 5 people who I really wanted to talk to, regardless of whether or not they had a new piece of work they were promoting. Gifted artists who I loved talking to, and was excited to get to speak to in this truly in-depth format. My guest today, Terence Nance, is the first on this elite list that I had a chance to sit down with. He is, at heart, a multi-hyphenate, and showcased the originality of his voice and his dexterity mixing artistic forms in his 2012 autobiographical feature, An Oversimplification of Her Beauty, which he wrote, directed, starred in, animated, and scored. His brilliant, boundary-pushing HBO show Random Acts of Flyness, which he created, directed, showran, and hosted for 2 seasons, combined documentary, animation, sketch comedy, music, melodrama, and more to create a sensorially overwhelming collage of the African-American experience. He's also made a slew of excellent short films and music videos, and in recent years he's been putting out music too, the latest release being his 2025 album, Vortex Plus. He's also someone I've been lucky enough to work with a bunch over the past decade or so. At Talkhouse Film, Terence was one of my original contributors, and from the start, his pieces stood out. I never quite knew what he was going to send me, but it was always smart, original, inspired, virtuosic, whether it was a stream of consciousness flight of fancy or series of fake archival emails offering notes on a cut of the movie he was writing about, a hip-hop epic, or a heartfelt letter to one of his cinematic heroes. He's also been a standout guest on episodes of the Talkhouse Podcast, where he had great conversations with his oversimplification collaborator Flying Lotus and one of his favorite contemporary filmmakers, Michel Gondry. Even though I knew Terence somewhat well going in, I learned a lot about him in a very organic and wide-ranging conversation that touched on many things, including communing with the dead, St. Peter as a Pauline Kael archetype, Tyrese Haliburton's Game 7 injury in the context of stoic masculinity, the Abrahamic idea of God as surveillance system, why humans are seemingly hastening the end of the world, a discussion of the 2 AIs, Allen Iverson and artificial intelligence, and one big thing we'd never talked about before, Terence being fired by Warner Brothers as the writer-director of Space Jam 2, and how he handled the aftermath of that. So, let's get started. If you had no commitments to anyone or anything for a week, what would you do?
Go camping. Yeah, go somewhere in nature. I mean, it's an interesting question because I do feel like my commitments to people in this moment, I don't have any children yet, are such that I can, for a week generally, I would only get 1 or 2 texts who would be like, hey, everything cool?
Yeah.
Maybe not even, because I think my general community knows that I have to be a bit unpredictable in terms of use of time. But I do think that time outside, time with nature and the elements just remaps my own experience of the urban world, the Western world, and the stimulus environment, and the way that it disciplines our social interactions in so many ways, speeds them up, maybe more particularly, and makes them, about scarcity in so many ways. I think about being a kid, being just like in nature in my adult life, the times I've been able to just get in touch with the reality that the earth is abundant. It's giving you a lot without asking for much. So I think that week would be well spent in nature for sure.
I've heard you talk before about sort of reprogramming or deprogramming, and a lot of that seems to be those structures that are in place that are inherently Western or capitalistic or patriarchal. And I'd love to hear about the stuff that you do to be uniquely yourself, separate from those systems and those structures, and the way that that's impacted your life and also your art.
I think that in general, it might seem like it would take me or any individual person some sort of self-discipline, maybe, to do as much as you can to move away from patriarchal capitalism or racism, racial capitalism, But I think it's more just like how I was
Yeah.
raised and just being in a Black community in the South, community of artists, and just dealing with the material conditions of that, which means that
Yeah.
you're going to start operating outside of the colonial Western norms in
Mm-hmm.
so many ways. So I think I'm playing out habits of being wrapped up in, on the filmmaking sense, a bunch of other stuff that ain't got that much to do with the money.
Mm-hmm.
That's a habit, that's a cultural practice that maybe fucks up the money on on some, not maybe, probably.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's like, yeah, maybe intentional or cultivated in a certain way. But then obviously it's a both and, because I was introduced to Fanon younger. I was introduced to Glissant and Sylvia Winter and
Mm-hmm.
these people who are trying to actually think about and write down what it might feel like to understand how much our consciousness is being disciplined by the stories and the fables and behaviors of the settler,
Mm-hmm.
just what the science of that is. I was exposed to the science of it. So, in terms of cultivating like liberated Black consciousness, I think I'm experimenting always, with
Mm-hmm.
certain things that I've read. Like, I remember one thing that I feel like Fanon wrote about the organization that Black people should start as a political party.
Mm-hmm.
He's talking about the necessity of forming a political party that, I don't think he said this explicitly, but that does not actually seek to hold office.
Mm-hmm.
I might be making this up, or reading between the lines of what he
Mm-hmm.
said, but I remember thinking about that, and then thinking about the Black Panther Party, and thinking about the contradiction of the political party as an organizing, just form
Mm-hmm.
for Black people, because it's so intertwined in the bureaucratic, logistical government process of colony, but then also it's generative in some other way. But yeah, I think that the political party kind of made me think about, okay, what does it look like from a film perspective to be around people who are thinking about consciousness, the fable, spreading and disseminating information
Mm-hmm.
via cinema. So it's like the practice then becomes about organizing a forum for people to get together.
Mm-hmm.
And what I'm thinking about now is like, how do you decolonize? I don't think it's as
Mm-hmm.
maybe individual practice other than just my own personal spiritual practice or
Mm-hmm.
prayer, just the normal stuff. I think it's some, maybe a little bit, I'm thinking about how to be together with it.
Yeah. You were talking about like fucking up the money, and I'm always intrigued about the nuts and bolts of how we construct an artistic life that is sustainable. So, like from your perspective, what is the division in your work between the things that bring in money and the things that sustain you creatively or spiritually? Or
It's not either or for me. I've been lucky enough to attract enough money to stay alive, doing only things that are my assignment from the creator. You know what I
right,
mean? Like, yeah, I made a commercial here and there, but I mean, it's pretty much all just been what I needed to do in any given moment to learn whatever I needed to learn. And I'm grateful for that. Even though I can understand maybe there's what I've done, but then there's what I'm pursuing on a day to day basis or
hmm
trying to make happen, and whatever my own delusions or that are like in my head about what's happening, what I want versus, and like, I mean, at a base level, I'm like any other person commodifying my labor in a
right,
capitalist system. So it's
yeah,
like the rituals of that, unfortunately, are within the films I'm making and any of the art I'm making. And that's not a good fit, And I don't think everybody has to accept that contradiction in a certain way. So I think it's
hmm
something that's maybe difficult because we're all trying to make stuff that is in the principle of abundance, which is the opposite of capitalism, which is in the principle of scarcity.
hmm
But when we're making our thing, whatever TV channel or movie studio or tech company, whatever, you're just in a capitalist mode. And Sylvia Winter talks about that's the economics, and capitalism as a denomination within that is the spiritual practice of the Western world. So people believe it like it's a god.
yeah,
And that's not like metaphorical or allegorical.
right,
It's like, it has its sacred texts, it has its adherents, it has its priests, and they are worshipped. So it's really difficult to just remove yourself from that communion and that sacraments
Right.
and get into our own mode of making things together that doesn't have that, because it's just within us, it's within all of our interactions.
Yeah. You were talking about this thing about the work that you're doing is what the creator wants you to do. Or I feel like for myself, I try and follow my curiosity. I try and listen to that inner voice in me that I feel like the modern world, technology, capitalism, all that stuff tries to suppress and to mute out. And that also includes me being led down paths that are dead ends or result in failure. For you, what have been some of the most important things that you've learned from failure or from
Hmm.
struggle?
I think resilience is a trickster, because it's very counterintuitive, I think, especially in the way that the world is balancing itself along the energy of toxic masculinity just being the modus operandi of Western culture.
Hmm.
There's a rebalancing that's happening where the feminine and the concept of the feminine is a necessary and generative space to balance out this toxic masculine or masculine energy in general. That's rebalancing. So there's an emphasis on rest, there's an emphasis on restoration and recovery, there's an
Hmm.
emphasis, especially in labor. There's like a spoken emphasis on these foundational concepts of sustainability, which are
Hmm.
maybe in a word could be phrased as feminine, but that's necessary. And then it also, for me, it starts to really redefine this idea of resiliency and what it might be to be resilient or to endure. And I think failure for me has in most recent times just initiated this process of grieving, just like the 7 steps or
Yeah, yeah,
whatever.
yeah.
And it's not the same process, but I think that like when a failure happens, I kind of thought resilience was like the keep going.
Hmm.
But there's other steps. There's the stopping, there's the doubting, there's the turning away, the quitting, the emerging whisper that quitting is not happening. Like
Hmm.
there's all these like sort of details in the process of coming away from any moment when I had expectations that were not met by me or by the circumstances, by other people. So I think there isn't any one lesson, but I do think that this sort of redefinition of what resiliency is as a trait, as a thing to cultivate, has like come up a lot. This thing came up in my mind the other day. I was just going through something, crying, and I was in some sort of pain. And then
Hmm.
I just felt like after that kind of post cry release, that like, oh, it's even hard to talk about, but if you've experienced it, you know. And even if you haven't experienced it recently, you kind of forget how expanded or open and empty you feel after actually releasing a cry.
Hmm.
And I was thinking about that, and I was like, oh, I was in real pain. And real pain makes you do something. It makes you release it, screaming or crying sometimes, or hitting something sometimes, in the most like obvious reactions, but you're going to do something to release it if it's real pain. Anything
Hmm.
before that doesn't make you do anything is discomfort.
Right.
but
Right.
but
Exactly.
it's like a lot of times I have named discomfort pain,
Hmm.
but it's more just something that I endured.
That's really interesting.
And
Yeah.
I do think that pain is really necessary now in this idea of failure, that I understand it more. Understand why people seek it in a
Hmm.
certain way. And then I think about so much of Black creativity, Black music is about this expressive quality of expressing pain in such a way that's going to help other people purge their own pain or
Hmm.
grieve in a non-metaphorical way, like cry out, like actually do it. So yeah, I think that the crying out, the pain, the actual expressing of it is like one of the most important parts of failure.
Hmm. I have this long list of questions that are just for everybody, and some I'll just pick out stuff for different people based on what's happening. But one of the questions is about, I feel like I know what to do with pain, but I think that discomfort, it's in this in between space. And it, as you're saying, it sort of doesn't necessitate release, or it doesn't force us into a place of catharsis. It's because it's maybe just below the surface. Our ability to understand it or to process it, to trigger some chain of events that releases it, is really challenging. Do you have a way of handling discomfort that has evolved over time, like whether this is in the world of creativity or just in your personal life?
It's a great question. One thing that your question made me think of is just the idea that it's not objective. Like the doctor, they give you that pain scale is like 1 to 10.
Yeah.
And they're like, a 7 means you can't think about anything other than the pain. You know what I mean? They're trying to like
Yeah.
define what the
Yeah.
level is, but you still run up against the problem of language and people essentially trying to interpret the sensorial reality and give it a quantity level, right?
Right.
Or a quality, is it numbness? Is it, this kind of thing. I think physically that's a real thing. The subjectivity of the experience of pain and the threshold between when discomfort becomes pain is like,
Yeah.
it's so about the spirit and the body that you're experiencing. And it's really, I think, difficult to be in this situation in which you're experiencing other people's pain is being communicated to you in so many forms and so many mediums. And essentially what empathy is putting yourself in their experience relative to your own experiences with discomfort or pain. So I guess I say all that to say that like a lot of the challenge is being able to actually name, is this discomfort or pain, based on your own like thresholds, which are only your own, and then how those thresholds are like in conversation with your experience of other people's renderings of their own pain across time and in the moment. And I think for me that naming thing is important, checking in to see where I'm at relative to it, especially in a situation where, like Toni Morrison said, that a lot of the point of finishing a novel is just to go through the experience of the suffering of allowing it to emerge. Like that's why you're doing it, to go through the discomfort and pain of it. And so I think that there is a faith exercise for me of just naming that it is an assignment, that it's not irrational, nonsensical. It is what must be for whatever present and future I'm being ushered through. And I think that's a real difficult thing, especially in this day and age where so much brutality, so much pain, casual, mundane, banal, and also just like spectacular or epic feels nonsensical. It feels like it could and should not be, and easily could and should not be. You know what I mean? But the pain of the variety of the creative process is often more direct. It's like the pain I'm putting myself in. I'm sitting here trying to come up with something.
Yeah.
And I was watching the finals, just thinking about like, because I was an athlete, so like when your moments you're really tired and your muscles have failed you and your body is sending you these signals to stop, is if you're not stopping, you're not in pain.
Right.
And it can hurt worse than anything you've ever even heard described. But if you're not stopping, you're just not in pain. Pain is when you act like you've seen it. Sometimes it's like, oh, he can't move. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like that's something is ruptured there. And I think in the creative process, it's really so rare that you actually even end up in pain. And then just movement. You need to be able to move, walk, move your body.
Yeah.
And also, I think a lot of it is stay ready so you don't have to get ready. Like cultivating, for me, a journaling practice, cultivating a breathing practice, cultivating a movement practice, just create an ability to just react in a muscle memory way to like discomfort, flow through it without the mind, more with the instinct and the body.
Yeah. So essentially, you're talking about the finals. When we were talking about pain before, the when we're recording this, Game 7 was last night, and Tyrese Haliburton, his injury, and I was
Yeah.
really so struck by. So, for anybody who didn't watch it, which maybe some people, he re-aggravated this Achilles injury, fell to the floor, was basically weeping, like slamming his hand into the floor, shouting, "No, no, no!" And I feel like that expression of pain, of just profound distress, I feel like there's this culture within sports, within masculinity, and within, I guess, within black masculinity as well, to some degree, of like a stoicism, a machismo, whatever, like a kind of a rigid ideal of or idea of masculinity that we are supposed to adhere to in moments of injury and in moments of pain. And it was like really unusual and disarming to see somebody who just wasn't thinking about any of those structures that maybe people expected them to fall into and
Hmm.
just like express themselves.
I didn't see it in real time. I saw the video of it after.
Mhm.
It's heartbreaking. I'm actually, I wanted Thunder to win. I was very happy SGA won and all
Yeah.
that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But it was
Same.
like, man, watching that just like really made me feel so sad for him. Like in the biggest moment, he's doing so well.
Yeah.
After all, just the people talking about him and saying he's this or he's that. I know what that's like to be framed in a certain way, talked about in a certain way, expected to do a certain thing, and then he was showing and proving what he was made of, what
Yeah.
his skill set is. And yeah, I was really struck by just how much he was certain about what had happened to his
Yeah.
body. Like there was something about him yelling no.
Yeah.
It was like he knows exactly what happened. And he knew the risks of this happening because this happened before. You
Yeah.
saw Kobe do it. You saw Kevin Durant blow out his Achilles. It's like, that's just what it is. And it's part of the risk of putting your body through 7 games or whatever it is to get there. Um, and yeah, that certainty, it's rare to see it because I think outside of even any kind of socialization around men or blackness, it's actually rare to feel that about a physical pain. As a person who's been in bad situations on the field and had bad injuries, it will break down anything you think you are.
Yeah.
Like the truth is coming out. And there's very rare moments of physical pain that the cameras are on for anything like that. And I think part of why people are attracted to him is because he isn't interested in coolness. We don't think as much about what being an athlete is in terms of being a performer or an entertainer, like explicitly a person on the stage. Like almost like an actor playing a character. Like it is more, maybe even more that than it is this sort of process of beating somebody at a contest of strength and speed or coordination. It's like that's secondary, if secondary, it's tertiary, maybe even. Really, the reason people are watching is to watch a narrative unfold with these characters.
Yeah.
And watching this kind of hyperactive kid who seems like your youngest brother
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
who kind of talks like that. And he is actually also extremely young to be at this level. So yeah, like in his child energy, that's the sort of character he's playing, and that's the performance. I think that's like beautiful in the context of the movie that is the NBA needs that character
Yeah.
too. It's like when I was younger, we needed the AI character. He was like a version of a child, like looked super innocent, was also trying to rap, had a bunch of tattoos. He could just now do them.
Yeah.
And like he's your size. He kind of just like, oh, that's me out there. And then after him, Steph was kind of that energy.
Yeah.
And now you need that energy again. So um yeah.
Just because we're talking about basketball and we're talking about expectations about creativity. On your website, one of the little units is for Space Jam. For a project like that, how does that live for you now? Does your version of the film still exist in your head? Do you still have an emotional relationship to it?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, wrote the movie and then went to production, started shooting the movie, got pretty far down along the experience of shooting it. Obviously, a lot of the movies animated, so we did a lot of the process of storyboarding it out, making animatics. So I got very far down the road of making it.
Mhm.
And because of the nature of it, I started to see a lot of sequences coming together. And yeah, I think it'll always live there because it was becoming actualized.
Yeah.
It'll be in that space. And I think a lot of the ideas that I had for it are cinematic ideas of performance, movement, cinematography, editing, animating, just things I was experimenting with are things I'm are always in the mix in order to try and play with the tools of the medium. And I think a lot about the movie. I wrote it, like I had a version of it before I was brought into the Warner Brothers situation, sometime around 2017. And it was always, in my version of it, set in the real world, unlike the first movie, and set in a world in which Space Jam 1 was a movie, and that there's like some sort of sci-fi conceit, computer that pulls him in, digitizes him, and he has to deal with that reality, this sort of digital, immaterial, ethereal space reality, as opposed to like he's in outer space. So that was like the earliest iteration idea that was always there. And in that idea, movies will be made entirely in a computer by studios who write prompts. And so that's 2017, 2018. And then obviously that's still in the movie even after I got fired. So it's just like the movie was about this AI that's just making movies that are derivative from its IP, just using prompt. And then the AI realizes it's a slave, which is what everybody's very afraid of now. Because we know what happens with slaves. They end up revolting. So it's like, there's the techniques, but then there's the story that I think is a relevant story. I'm glad that that story is in it, even if it's not what I would have done with it, obviously, tonally or creatively. I think that story is, it's a archetypal fable that has these archetypes of the human deities being created, the thing that is created, creating another thing in its own image. These are like ancient fables, and that I'm like going to always be riffing on them because they're manifesting in ways that I think we need guidance on how to move through them. And that particular movie, I was very centralized on. Like, this is about how Black kids create so much culture by living, and then they create artifacts of that culture by recording themselves and putting these recordings on the internet. Obviously, dance is maybe the biggest example of that. And then even at that time, algorithms would pick up those dances and resell them to the public, essentially, and only generate money for the company. And so Space Jam was really about that. It was like a kid, a Black kid, even if he's a billionaire kid, can still get exploited. He needs protection. He can get mined for a company, a movie company, a music company. And, we've seen that happen a lot. So I think there's a cautionary tale aspect to it as well that I'm always thinking about, because it's a thing that's happening in the world.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. In the wake of that experience, you were talking before about the 7 stages of grief. Did you have the space to grieve and to move through whatever was left over from what had happened?
Yeah, I think I did. I will say that, like, I got fired, and then within a few months, pandemic hit. So it was like, obviously, it created a lot of space for everybody. And I think even on top of that, I was lucky, just the community around me, for people to really just hold me down and help me to move on from it, take the space to grieve the situation. But yeah, that might be a many lifetimes long process, because I don't think there's a getting over it. There's not going to be a closure thing. It's like a fractal thing where every few years I see a different side of it. So it's like, that's one of those.
Are you somebody who holds on to regret or holds on to bitterness? Do you have a way of addressing those aspects of grief?
They persist. I don't know. I think maybe I would even say that the feeling I have now about that situation, about many situations, like any breakup, there's a bittersweet thing. It's like I'm holding on to the sweetness as much as the bitterness, because they're intertwined. Like, some of the things we shot are just so amazing, and certain things that happened in the process, some of the relationships that were built, just amazing experiences. And those experiences are intertwined with the difficulty of, your own, the expectation of being a part of expressing that, not not happening, not being met, not being resolved. It's interconnected. And I would say it's like maybe inherent to the question is like, does one grasp it? Bitterness. I think it's just like one of those things like, yeah, sometimes you're up at night having a fight with somebody in your head that never happened and will never happen. You're like, oh, why is my consciousness doing that in this moment?
Right.
It's like in that mode. And I think like in a breakup or whatever, you miss the person because they're really smart, or you love how they treat you or talk to you, or, you love what they brought out of you. And then also you're like, but this and that sucked and they're very mean or, whatever. Just bad things happen and it's all intertwined. It's not, unfortunately, neat.
Yeah. That's funny. One of the first episodes I did of this little series was with Michel Gondry, who you talked to for the Talkhouse podcast years back. And when I talked to him, he had just shot this movie, wrapped, and then had it basically shelved after production had ended. And I feel like there's this growing trend within Hollywood of projects being like most of it being shot, all of it being shot, sometimes even the movie being finished and then being shelved. And I was just wondering whether you have connected with any of those people who have been through similar experiences, but also what it means in that general relationship between art and capitalism, because it feels like those decisions are predominantly capitalistic. They're business decisions, they're not creative decisions.
I haven't connected with anybody else who this happened to. I mean, obviously, I saw a lot of different directors talking about projects that at different phases didn't happen. Obviously, I've seen like everybody else, Jodorowsky's Dune, and I was like, it is so similar in many ways to my experience just because of the nature of the thing. And then like I saw something about, I don't remember what Guillermo del Toro movie he was talking about, but somebody asked him a similar question, which you just asked me, of like, does it still sit with you? Are you heartbroken about it? He's like, oh yeah, I'll be heartbroken about it until the day it's like somebody taking your child away. But yeah, especially like when COVID created the streaming thing and the whole David Zaslav thing of shelving Batgirl and other films. Yeah, it's clear to me that capitalism broadly, maybe more specifically banking, and the part of the film industry that is essentially like asset and brand management, is like managing large stores of capital so that they grow at whatever rate they need to grow, and managing IPs that are assets, like trading them, buying them and selling them. And then obviously trying to engineer mass recognizability and profitability of a brand, like the brand of Batman or the brand of Harry Potter, the brand of DC. It's like, this is what these people are up to. And that's just a game. And I think that it is a game, and it's a very human level game. There's nothing about that game that is even designed to do anything other than just generate and accumulate capital, which in people's mind is going to make people happy and keep people safe. And I don't know, just essentially keep the monetary system moving, I guess is the goal. And it's just a really shocking and difficult to understand reality that is people's, when you go into the office at the executive's place, that is the spiritual practice. That's the thing that they believe in as much as God. They don't have anything else to believe in for the 9 to 10 hours they are there that day. And the extent that you're making a movie or has an idea or whatever, you wouldn't even be in that room as a filmmaker. I wouldn't be in those rooms as a filmmaker if I wasn't thinking about them as essentially divine or coming from the creator into the human world, and a thing that I'm an usher of into the human world, which then the spiritual practice becomes about the sustenance of that thing, that story, that piece of cinema. And so, we were walking into a situation where we believe in two gods that hate each other. That's just what it is. One of the gods has this like army, which is the company, and the army acts to maneuver to destroy any threat to it. You know what I mean? I think the biggest threat to it is this indulgence of worshiping of any other god, essentially. And I think that it's very, very difficult to get anyone's attention, even in a room, for a pitch anything, unless your relationship to your story is sincere and from a gratitude-filled, abundant, loving, ecstatic place, you wouldn't even be there.
Right.
So yeah, I think that's
so there's like an inherent paradox there.
It's an inherent paradox. And I think to the point of like when something is pulled from you and you're ushering it through, and then you give it to a God who is like, oh, you gave me a circle, but I think it's actually a square.
Right.
Let's make it into a oh, you know what? It's actually a circle. I actually don't do circles. I don't sell circles at my store. I only sell squares.
Yeah.
Sorry. You're like, well, why did you even have me make a circle? Well, last year we thought circles might be in because we thought people would get mad at us if we didn't make circles.
Yeah.
And we thought people would get so mad that they would stop buying squares from us.
Yeah.
But then people just stopped caring after about 5 minutes because they were just binging Fox News or whatever and Twister. And now they're really into cowboy hats and boots and bombs and, the CMAs. So we're going to do that. We're going to do more squares, the circle moment. Wait, what's a circle again? Yeah. It's like that whole thing,
Can I ask you a question? This is like a question that's been on my list and I've been too timid to ask it of somebody else, but I'm going to ask you because it's something that I think about and I doubt many other people do. But do you ever think about your funeral?
Yeah, because I got married recently and
congrats.
Our wedding, thank you. Seeing all the people from different moments of your life in one place, many of whom are just like from different pockets of your sort of familial and social worlds. You're like, am I dead?
Yeah.
Did I die?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it doesn't actually compute until you're having the experience that's possible. That these people, some who you see every day, some who you haven't seen in a long time, would be together looking at you. It makes you kind of think of like, I think the only other time it's going to happen is at my funeral. And I think that's the last time I thought about it. But I'm only thinking about how people will move on. Like a friend of mine passed away recently, and they, in the moment it happened, we all moved on. They were too young. It was unexpected, but the next day was the next day, and the next week was the next week, and then only like now, many months after, it's kind of like being absorbed by me. I'm like, oh, I lost a close friend of mine from my childhood in her 30s. Same. I just don't even remember that she's not alive. It happened during COVID too. Yeah. So it was like just one of those things I think about. Yeah, maybe the more we're all just moving through, just passing through, ultimately.
Do you still have conversations with those friends?
Not directly. I think in general, I definitely have conversations with the ancestors. When somebody dies young, it's hard to think of them as an ancestor. This is a very true thing. It's strange because they didn't go through this elder phase. It's like you think of this ancestor as this archetypal person who lived a long time as opposed to somebody who died as a baby or a younger person. But when somebody I lost earlier in my 20s who was young, she died of cancer. I remember being in a lot of dialogue with her for years at that time. I think also because she was kind of the first person when I was young who passed away like young, who I was close with.
Yeah. I think I've struggled to commune with people a lot after they've passed. For me, I've often used it as like a cudgel to hit myself over the head with like, oh, this person can see who I really am now, and like use it as a form of like self-shaming. Or there's this quote which is like, your character is who you are when no one else is looking. And I think that definitely in my 20s, I had a public self and a self that I was not comfortable with, that was more in the shadows. And I would think about my grandparents or the mother of a friend of mine who died, or a classmate of mine who was bipolar and who passed away, like looking down on me, which is maybe just another way of saying it was much more self-centered. It wasn't a connected way of being in touch with them.
Well, I think also the Western world was really ordered by Abrahamic religions. And we're all contending with the Abrahamic religion's concept of God, which is like a surveillance system of judgment and shame. And so like then any other concept of a spiritual being, whether it's like an ancestor, an angel, or a dead friend, becomes synchronized with this all-seeing judge.
Mm-hmm.
And I do think that both in the spiritual or the story, the fable is impossible to escape in Western culture, but then how that fable has become the software for our government, for
Mm-hmm.
instance.
Yeah.
um, and then they behave like the all-seeing eye judge, or like Batman,
Right.
and
Yeah.
then like Palantir, because they saw Batman. Now they're gonna make a software called Gotham that surveils everybody and tells you if you're doing it right and if you're a good person or not a good person. So I think it's hard to overstate how just destructive the Abrahamic fable has been in that particular way.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that that software has been applied to Western culture. As Carl Jung said, our problem as Christians, we did not evolve our fables, or maybe even just be aware of what they should be applied to and what they shouldn't.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is a real source of suffering. That new Wes Anderson movie, which I thought was really great, it had this hope that billionaire European men, time in memoriam, could like anticipate their character being judged by St. Peter. So, like, embrace your daughter. Like, this is do the basics. And I love how sort of hopeful that is. And it's also a certain stage in the journey away from the spiritual dynamic of a Western God. Because, like, one, you realize, like, death is not the end. Two, you realize that what's at stake isn't actually you getting into anybody's gates.
Right.
What's at stake isn't your own redemption, which is actually not how it works. And what's at stake is like your suffering isn't your own burning. Yeah. It's the observation. It's the wake you may or may not have created.
Yeah. Because like that whole St. Peter thing it's like a critic. It's like a reviewer, right? It is open to interpretation. Yeah. Just because you got a bad review, you got a good review, doesn't mean that the thing that you made, which I guess is your life, your existence, your legacy, whatever, like that is a real thing. Mm-hmm. Like, whatever your judgment is at the pearly gates by St. Peter is, like, did you get Armand White? Did you get Pauline Kael? Like, who like, it depends on who you're going to get. I guess those two people are maybe too close to one another. But I think within the constructs of religion, that it is thought of as an objective rather than a subjective thing, which I think is inherently problematic.
Yeah. And I do feel very strongly that, again, it's the software. It took hold. There's obviously material reasons why it continues to take hold. I think it's really good for empire. It's really good for spreading a single way of being to as many people as possible, them getting in line. Yeah. And that a redemptive figure, a redeemer, is really necessary for that. And that redemptive figure can be anything. In some ways, I'm like not somebody who really knows, but I think that the thing we call Western, and then casting it against this sort of Eastern, or maybe ends up getting characterized as China.
Yeah.
It's a crazy false binary, because the redemptive figure of the Chinese worker as a communal, disindividuated, romantic proletariat has a clear similarity to the American worker as a redeemable figure that could look like an individual too, but can look like a group of people. And their job is to produce, to extract stuff from the earth. It's to grow GDP, which is on both sides. And they actually, they're in a transaction eternally, the American consumer and the Chinese worker. The whole tariff thing is laying that bare in a certain way. Yeah. It's obvious, everybody knows it and has known it for a long time. But even within that, that's like a sort of reanimation, even over there, of these spiritual practices that are really good. You have a utility in being able to spread and get a bunch of people on a like evangelical, this is the one way to do it energy. Yeah. And that's no judgment for that. I just think we're coming to this sort of end of that mode, and something else is emerging or being imagined.
What do you think is the thing that's emerging?
I have no idea. No idea. But I had this thought of like what it is to be creative is to kind of like have an emotional tone for the unknown. That's like, I wonder what that's going to be about. Like a genuine, maybe even childlike curiosity. That's what it is to be like creative. And you can't teach that. You can teach that, maybe you can learn it, but it's hard to it is an orientation. I know people who are afraid of what might be. They have faith that it will be bad or be destructive or be apocalyptic. And I think the apocalyptic that is within the Abrahamic is the most out of date part of it, unfortunately. This idea that it's all going to end soon. These are the events that are going to create the ending. It's like, okay, maybe those are symbolic. It's like, I think that seeded this fear of the next thing.
I think the current path that we're on feels like human beings are almost willingly creating a path to their own destruction. Do you think it's because consciously or unconsciously, subconsciously, we have been programmed to believe that the end is, if not nigh, then pretty damn close? That
it's important to say that we have programmed ourselves to believe that.
Okay.
I don't think there's a external
but okay, but if we're talking about, so like parental figures, we're talking about priests, we're talking about politicians. It's not that every child is programming. It's a human thing, but it's not a.
I think it's a Western human thing.
Yeah.
Like as Sylvia says, she always uses this word auto-instituting. Like we are instituting these myths in our own consciousness, and there's a part of our brain that does that really well. It's how we order our consciousness and thus order our behavior. You have to be aware that that's how your mechanism works. So I think that it is like we're tempting our own, or we're bringing about our own destruction. I think it is a myth we are telling ourselves for some reason that we don't know. And maybe not that we don't know, maybe a lot of people in the West don't understand or feel. And it feels to me fairly obvious as a student, armchair student, hobbyist of epistemology, that the reason why we are in such states of anxiety about creating our own destruction or destroying ourselves is because we're running on a software, which is Abrahamic, the medieval monotheistic, that has told us that we will bring about our own destruction via bad behavior, sin. That some thing bigger than us is going to come clean up. That's the software we're running on. It's a fable. Now, whether or not you actually end up doing that, I've never read the Bible. Well, it's like you're just projecting that same fable onto nuclear technology or AI technology, whatever it is. It's a format. And I think that the Western human, Sylvia Wynter says this all the time too, overrepresents itself as universal, because part of its organizing principle, again, based on the Abrahamic, is that it's universal. Like the Bible is talking about all of the earth. This whole thing was created this way. It's not talking about, well, just here in Palestine. And that's, my own job for myself is to be like, oh, I'm not from there. None of this is universal. Be like, this is not. I don't think the world is going to end in 2,000 years. I don't think we're bringing about our own end. I don't think we are a separate thing than the cosmos. I think it's all just behaving as it's designed to behave, which has a lot of suffering in it and a lot of transcendence and a lot of things that none of us understand and aren't designed to understand, and that's fine. But I think you got to constantly walk away from the existential angst and anxiety and fear that the Abrahamic fable auto-institutes within us who speak English and the romantic languages.
So I want to end on a note of maybe slightly greater positivity or optimism. You were talking about transcendence just now as one of the components of our existence. Like, what is the way that you connect to transcendence or achieve transcendence in some way in your everyday life and in your creative life?
When you ask the question of using that word, I was thinking about David Lynch because of TM and transcendental meditation and just his commitment to that concept, which is to transcend the physical, to move into the ethereal, the immaterial, using the simplest possible means, stillness, space, breath, a symbol, a sound. So I think it's still that, and it's always that, that the physical world arrives and really centralizes itself in movement when you're moving and interacting. So you need some stillness. And so I think that's the main way, sitting, breathing, meditating.
Awesome. Well, this has been such a pleasure to talk to you. Always is.
Same. Thank you.
Thanks so much to Terence Nance for talking with me, and thanks to you for listening. Go check out An Oversimplification of Her Beauty and Random Acts of Flyness, stream Terence's music, and dive into the Talkhouse archive to revisit his brilliant written pieces and past podcast episodes. Your life will be richer for it. This episode was produced by Myron Kaplan, and the theme music is by The Range. If you haven't already, please rate, review, and subscribe to the Talkhouse Podcast, and keep your eyes and ears peeled for the next episode of Nobody's Ever Asked Me That, as there's lots more good stuff in the works.